Hi everybody, I'm Stephanie and I am here today from Competitive Canines. We're going to talk about training the nose lock and the nose point alert. This is probably one of the topics that we start to see coming in now, and so we decided we played with the ideas for a little while of how we wanted to do this, and I thought we'd try something live just so that people you have a chance to give some feedback. So feel free to throw any questions you have up in the comments. Chris is supposed to join us as well. Hopefully Chris is one of our other instructors and should be able to give us some answers. We'll definitely open it up to question and answers at the end. So what we want to look at, some of the biggest problems we have that we see people saying is they're struggling to understand exactly where the hide is. They're struggling to know to very pinpoint precision if the judge is asking them, especially as they're starting to reach some of the higher levels. We're seeing a lot of senior dogs starting to participate in the sport. And with these senior dogs, sometimes they don't have the flexibility or the joint mobility to be able to sit or stand for longer periods of time. As we're getting dogs that are starting to trial now at elite, where you might have hides above stable surfaces, sometimes the can be tricky to do. So if you're ever wondering, how am I going to get precise enough? How do I make sure that I've got a formal alert in and maybe an inaccessible hide? This is what we're going to do. So we're going to start you off. This is stuff we start in our basic beginner level, and then we can actually take this and you can use this and progress it on into actual alerts. So I'm just going to cut quickly over to our presentation here. As I said, the idea here is getting a nose point or a nose lock. And so the first thing that we need to look at then is, what is it? So when we're talking about the nose point or the nose lock, and there's a few different terminologies you'll hear people say. You'll also hear the term freeze. Basically, it's a final response. So the nose point is actually a trained behavior. It's not something, some dogs might, particularly in the pointing breeds, offer it naturally, but for most dogs, it's not a natural behavior. This is something we actually have to train. When we see it, usually we see the dogs will stop the head movement. So they'll be sniffing around, they'll be sniffing, checking, and then the head is going to stop. When the head stops, oftentimes the nose should be as close as possible to the source, or as close as the dog can physically get to the source with the nose pointed at it. Some dogs will actually look at it. Other dogs will be kind of, they might be with their nose on it, but then looking and screwing their eyes back a little bit at the handler. Our focus with this, it's not a stare, it's a nose. Certainly there are other ways to do it, but when we're training this, our goal is to aim at where the nose is. Oftentimes they will stop sniffing and you'll actually see them even hold their breath. We have, again, Chris with Irina will actually touch the dog to feel whether or not she's still breathing, and that will tell her something. Because it's a precision behavior, it's much easier for the handlers to read. So because the dog's nose is stopped at that source, we can really easily say, even when we're nervous, exactly where that hide is. So if we're asked, it's easy to indicate the location. We've had a couple of jokes come out with this as well, and that's a whole other story. But the idea is that it doesn't matter what you are doing, even if you had looked away for a second, because the dog's nose is staying there, you have a chance to take a breath, to think, and to be able to say, this is where it is. The other big benefit to it is that it can be offered for any hide at any location. So if the dog gets up, let's say we've got a hide on a post or on a wall above, particularly as we reach elite, it's above at the back, the dog is standing on the chair, maybe there's not enough room for the dog to sit or down. Instead of having to leave the odor, they can actually keep that nose there and have your formal alert without having to leave it, and it's easy for the dogs to do. When we're training this, we actually train this concurrently with searching. So we start training it right off the bat. It's not something that we don't wait until the dogs know how to search for it. This way, once we're kind of training two different thoughts, right? We're training the search and we're training the nose lock, and by the time both things are getting there, it's easy then to transition and to blend them into the two different things. So I briefly discussed what it looked like. I want to show you a couple videos now of what we're talking about when we do this. And so we've got Irina here. You're going to see her checking. She's sniffing along. She's getting her nose right to source before stopping. Same thing with Griffin. We see the head check, nose right at source. So in all of these videos that you're seeing, the dog's noses are immediately where the source of the odor is. So you see the way he's frozen here? That's kind of what we want to see there. And then we're coming through here. We've got Irina. This is an example of a higher hide. So as she's getting up, now if she were to have to sit here, she would have had to leave the hide in order to sit. Again, we've got Griffin here. All of these, again, bang on exactly where the hide is. If you were asked, without knowing even the dog, you would be able to say exactly what's going on. This is fun because when it's underneath things, again, we can get them to get their heads right there. I know whether it's under the shelf. I know whether it's on the shelf. I know whether it's between boxes. This is going to be no, different height. Between the bags. So again, you see the difference. We know exactly that it's actually under the bag rather than under the shelf with this, so it's not as difficult. And right, again, stopping between the bags. So instead of one of the earlier ones you saw, if the judge were to ask me where, I would actually be able to, instead of saying the shelf, I'd be able to say either under the shelf or between the bags. Right there. And one of the things you can see is that he actually stops his tail movement. So some of them, and you saw Irina as well, if you watched her chest, you see the chest stop expanding. That's the stopping of the motion. So one thing before we really get into how we train it, our first step that we need to do is teach the dogs a marker. So when we teach this behavior, because it's precision, we need a precision behavior, a pinpoint behavior, we need to have timing, and we need to have a precise timing. By the time I've said, good dog, that's what I want, the dog may have done 4 different behaviors. So we want to initially be able to mark just a specific moment in it. So when we do that, then we want something, what we call a marker, and a marker is a word that's used, or a sound that's used at the precise moment that is getting the dog a reward. So it lets the dog know that specific behavior or that specific action is what's getting the reward. That lets us be a little bit more relaxed about delivery, so we don't have to be as precise on getting that reward there really, really quickly. It also allows, just for a more precision training, as I mentioned earlier, you can use a verbal yes or something short and sweet, but the sound from a clicker tends to be more precise, and it tends not to draw the handler into the dog, or sorry, draw the dog into the handler. Certainly they might look to you for the reward, but it's less personal, and so that often helps it be more effective for the dog. The other thing is, most people, oddly enough, are actually faster, once they understand the clicker, are faster to react with the clicker than they are with the verbal. Here's the thing though, we can't just sit there and say, here's a clicker, dog, let's start training. We actually need to let them know this is how it works, that the clicker means something is coming. So what we do is what we call charging the marker. The idea with this is that we click and we give a treat. 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 Eventually what starts to happen is the dog, in the dog's mind, the click predicts the treat. So we're doing this within 1 to 2 seconds. Toy dogs, you can also click and use a toy. It will take a little longer because you're having to spend some time playing, but it's certainly an option. Generally speaking, though, it's a little quicker to do this with food. So once we've done that, what starts to happen is we'll see we click, and the dog is actually going to look. Okay, so the dog is going to be looking for the food, and they're going to be like, oh, wait, food is coming. So now at that point, we start to do this in different places. We do it in different areas. We do it all over the house. We might start then asking for a sit and click and treat, just to start to let the dog realize that their action is influencing the clicker. But the biggest thing is the dog needs to be, no matter what they're doing, any position they're in, they hear the click, they go, oh, food. Once we have that association, then we can actually move on to the training side of things, and so starting to get that lock. We start off using a lid. You can start with a margarine container. Oftentimes we'll send our beginners home with like a supply list, and just a margarine container with a hole cut in is fine. The hole size needs to be big enough that you can hand the food through. Okay, so you can see here with Irina, her nose can get through, but also Chris would be able to put her hand right through to feed. So when we do it, we're actually going to be feeding from the back. Beyond that, you don't want it too big so that the dog, when they get excited, doesn't push hard enough to get their nose stuck in it. We have seen that happen if you've got a very enthusiastic dog, particularly once we start training this onto the box. So you do want to try and keep that the hole small enough that you're not getting stuck, but big enough that you can manipulate around it. If you see on the picture here, you can see that there is a scent swab at the back. So this has, in our case, the cocktail that we use. You can do whatever odors you're using. It doesn't really matter, but you want that swab in the straw and secured to the back near the hole. So this starts to make the association between the action and the odor. And you'll see later on the dog is going to be sniffing. And as she's sniffing, then she's actually inhaling, just like when we pair when we're searching, she's actually inhaling some of the odor and starting right from there to make the association with what we want. So we're holding the treat from the back when we start, and we need the dog to be comfortable putting their nose right up to the lid. So we take the food and we put it all the way through the hole so that literally the food is on the other side from the back to the front, and the dog can just be eating right from our hand. We do that a few times until we know the dog is not worried about the hole anymore. They're not worried about the lid. They're comfortable going up. And until we start to see that they realize something interesting happens around this lid. Then we take the food and we hold it just behind the hole. So it's almost where, if you see where Irina's nose is in the picture, it's literally right behind that. So we're getting her right behind there, and we're holding the food there, and she should start to put her nose up thinking, hey, where'd the food go? Now we can mark and reward. As soon as that nose touches or goes to that hole, we can mark with our clicker or our yes, and we feed, again, from the back through to the front. So we always want that food coming from odor source, which is, in this case, on the back of the lid. So we're feeding, holding it right back there. We click, we treat. Now the dog starts to realize, and when we see that the dog is consistently putting their nose up to that lid, we can move on to increasing either distance or duration. So we never increase both. When I'm talking about increasing distance, I'm talking about the distance of the treat. So instead of holding it then right behind the hole on the box, we start to move it further and further back and further away. That starts to reduce the influence of the food in the dog bringing their nose up to the hole. The other thing it starts to do is help minimize the licking, pushing, and pawing. This is the first thing I increase. I know we used to increase the duration first and hold the food there, but we found that because dogs would get really excited, they were pushing and pawing and grabbing at the lids, and it made it much more difficult then to start getting duration with a lock. We were getting duration with the nose at the hole, but it wasn't pretty, and it actually started to create some issues with dogs that were pushing too hard on the fines, and something that I'm even encountering with one of my dogs. So we're moving the treat further and further back pretty quickly. We're still clicking though as soon as the dog's nose gets there, and we're still feeding from behind. If you have a dog that is really pushy, you can brace the lid against your knees, or if you have two people, somebody can hold the dog and while the other person is holding the lid. The person holding the dog can click so that both of your hands are free. Just play around with it, see what works to get some resistance, and always remember, only click when the nose is at the hole. I don't want you panicking about trying to get the food fast. Everybody always worries about having their hands in their pockets and things like that. The click tells the dog that is what is getting the reward. So I'm going to say that again. The click tells the dog that is what is getting the reward. That's what I want you to focus on, is getting the click timing there when the nose is there, rather than worrying about everything else. You want to make sure the dog isn't licking and the dog isn't pawing, and you're not getting any sort of craziness in your behaviors when you click. So you move until, let's say, the food is behind your back. So now there's no food influence. The dog is consistently putting their nose up to the hole. Now we start to increase the duration. So at first we're clicking literally as soon as the dog's nose touches it. Now we can start to say, okay, 1, 1,000, click, treat. 2, 1,000, click, treat. Okay, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, click, treat. And we're building it up that way. We're building it very gradually. You want to be careful that you don't stick to one setup, so say 1 second with the food behind your back, for too long. You want to progress relatively quickly, just not so quickly that the dog gets frustrated and gives up. If you have to, you can always backtrack a little bit, but one of the problems that happens is people often will do like a 3-second lock for a week, and the dog just gets so dependent on that 3 seconds that it's really difficult to increase the duration beyond that. So what are we looking at? How far do we want them, or how long do we want them holding? Our end goal is that the dogs will hold for 5 to 10 seconds without the food behind the lid, so that they're not reliant on it. If the dog at any point as we're increasing it gives up, so they look away, whatever, we don't reward them and we restart completely. So we reset it and we restart the count again. At 5 to 10 seconds, at that point is when we start to move on and we start to put the lid on the boxes and things like that. You can go for longer. Certainly it looks pretty cool if you work longer, but for most people that 5 seconds, you're going to figure out what the dog is telling you in a trial. And if you don't, you probably need to work on yourself more than working on the dog at that stage. So I'm going to do a quick video again here, and we're just going to show you an example of how we go through this. So you can see Chris putting the food all the way through the hole, and then you can see her hands there, and Irina's just able to nibble right through there. So again, the food is all the way through the hole, and this is the first start. So the lid could be a little lower here so that she's not having to stretch up quite so much. So now she moves it, and you can see from behind the way her hand is coming all the way through. And then she starts to move it, and she's going to hold it just behind and push through. And she's holding it just behind in a second here. Irene's going, and then pushing through. And so you can see how she's moved to holding it further back. And so this is another angle again. So she's not rewarding here because of the licking. You see us wait until she gets the nose there and hands through. And then she's waiting. She's pushy, pushy, pushy. She's waiting. She gives the lock. And now this is where we would click and treat. You can see that we're starting to wait longer and longer on each of these. And her nose is through. Again, I'm not worried at this stage whether she's got her mouth closed, whether any of that. What we're focusing on, our criteria, is the nose is through and that she's not pawing, digging, and we're not setting up more destructive behaviors. Again, nose, and she's handing through. And then you start to see now she's actually altering the lid position so that it's in different spots. We start with it really easy so the dog's not having to do a whole lot of work to get their nose there. But as they start to figure it out, she's starting to move things. So now she's bringing it almost to where it's in a position that it would be on a lid or on a box. She did vertical. We want to think of any angle the dog might have to offer that lock in a search and proof it on that. So we're doing any angle we need to, and all of this is with the lid. So this is all foundation work. This is before we ever bring it into a search, before we ever bring in a container, any of that. So then how do we go on from there? Well, our next step then is to get it into a box or onto a box. So we take it onto our normal containers. So we generalize the lid position like you saw at the end of the round just now. And as they figure it out, we also can change angles, different heights, different positions. We might have it against our body. We might have it away from our body. We want to make sure that the dog is reliably doing it. And if you need to, when you change position, you might need to drop your criteria and reward after just a few minutes or a few seconds, sorry, and then increase it back up to the 5 to 10 seconds. So we get that the dog is reliable. Now we're going to take it onto a box. And so we warm up in the session that we start with the box. We warm up with the lid first. Okay, so we start off with the lid. We do a couple of reps with the lid just to get the dog into the mindset of what we're doing. And then we put that lid, so the target lid, again, that lid has the straw there. We put it on a box. So if you've been using a margarine container, you can put it on the lid onto the margarine container. At this point, it's easier probably to get onto whatever containers you might see in a trial. So generally speaking, plastic, if you're doing SDDA, plastic Rubbermaid bins are the most common, but similar things to that will work as well. At this point, I'm not worried about whether the box is opaque or not. There's nothing from that perspective. We're just training the lock. It's not an actual search yet. So we put the lid on the box, but here's the thing. Do not put food in the box. This is something that people will often do. They'll put the food in the box to try and get it, and you come out with the same problems as when we had the food behind the lid. So we start getting digging, pawing, scratching, biting, licking. We don't want any of that in there. So there's no food in there, but the lid is on. There is odor taped to the back of the lid, just like before, and you're going to hold the box exactly like you did the lid in the initial steps. So you've got it kind of tilted to the side, or so that the lid and the hole is facing the dog's nose if the dog is standing naturally. As soon as the dog's nose gets up to the hole on there, you're going to mark and reward. So it's literally, you're not asking for the lock yet. We've changed the picture a little, so we're marking and rewarding immediately, just like we did with the lid only at the start. But here's the thing. Now that you're holding the box, you can't be feeding from behind the hole. So at this stage now, you're going to be presenting your reward directly in front of the hole. So the idea here is rewarding at source rather than from source. So you're not waiting too long, but now the dog is putting its nose up. You know it's going and putting its nose right up to the hole. Now we can start to say, okay, let's increase our duration before we mark and reward. Again, make it gradual, 1,000, then go for 2 1,000s, then go for 3 seconds, and actively count this. You may not want to count it out loud so you don't distract your dog, but count it. It's really easy to think that you're being consistent and end up not being consistent. Usually, though, you can progress this a little more quickly because they have the history now of working with the lid. It'll go a lot faster. Same thing as before, try not to go so slowly that the dog develops a habit of holding for a specific amount of time and then leaving on their own, but don't push it so fast that they give up. So now let's say we're getting, with that, you holding that box, we're getting 5 to 10 seconds of a lock. Now we're going to start to generalize the box position. So you're going to start to move it. You're going to be changing it a little bit and changing the angles so that it's vertical, horizontal, and gradually working until you get the box on the ground. So once the box is on the ground, that's when you can start to vary your reward. So you can start to drop the reward on top of the box. You can start to, if you're using a toy especially, you can start to call them away and reward by play. Remember though, you're still using your marker, so you need to be clicking when the dog's nose is on that box so that you're not accidentally rewarding the dog looking at you or moving away. So again, that timing of the marker is critical here. So now we're going to go in again just to show you where we go with this. This is actually some videos from one of our beginner classes, one of our recent classes, and it'll show you a little bit of the progression. So these guys, you can see how they're holding the box at first, just like the box would have been with the lid, and then you can't hear the clicker, but they are clicking and feeding directly in front as soon as the dog's nose is there. And then you'll see them start to increase the duration. So Shady here is waiting a little longer. And then we've got Akaya, so again, waiting a little longer. And then we've moved it gradually until we reach the ground. So now at this point, we're waiting and mark and reward quickly. Ideally, I'd like when you're doing this that you stand up so that your body posture isn't influencing the dog as well. But sometimes it can be hard to learn 3 things at once, for sure. So she's putting the food on the lid, waiting for the lock, and then rewarding. And as they get better, then we just start to change it so that the food is no longer right on the lid. And you're not, you're able to stand up, you're moving around, and then you can start to add other objects in. So I hope this gave you some idea of things. Is there any question? I'm just going to flip things over. Is there any questions on any of how we start this? Throw them up in the comments. I'm going to keep this up for a minute or two. We have our email here as well as our website. You can always feel free to ask us anything. You can post on the Facebook page. I am going to leave this video up probably for a week or so that anybody that missed it gets a chance to see it. And I'm also going to send this out to the newsletter as well. So if you're looking, you can feel free to visit the website and jump onto the newsletter if you want a copy of it emailed to you. Are there any other questions on any of this? I'm just kind of looking through the comments here. Yeah, somebody said the lid, their dog always wants to walk around to the other side. That's where I would actually even hold it, adjust the location, or you can hold the lid even right up against your body so that they can't move around. Against your knees, if you sit on a chair, you could put the box, the lid on either side of your knee, the corners, and again, using your body to block. And then just being careful to be really quick with your rewards as well, and quick with your markers as you need to. I see a couple people saying thank you, you're welcome. I'm just going to cut over here from there. So I hope, as I said, I hope that helped. If you have, I'm going to leave this up for about a week so we can jump on and we'll monitor it and jump on and answer hopefully any questions that you guys have. I've got to say a big shout out and thank you to Chris for helping with this so that it's a little easier to monitor some of the questions rather than me trying to do about 5 things at once. Any more questions? No? All right. So I am going to head out now. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And again, I will leave this up. Feel free to ask. We'll talk to you soon.